So again, our training today is brought to you by our partners over at Ventura County. And today we are so proud to be joined by Micah Bailey, one of the business solutions specialists there, who's here to share more about the resources available to employers like you. Good morning, Micah.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a great day and thank you for joining us this morning. We're very fortunate to have such a great training provided by the California Employers Association. And this is just like they mentioned, these are some topics that you guys requested some input on, and I think they're going to have some great insights. At the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County, there's a lot of no cost supports that we have to support businesses just like yours. You'll see on screen, there's a no cost HR hotline that's provided both in English and Spanish, Monday through Friday, and it can provide info, ideas, best practices on things like hiring and firing practices, harassment prevention, and many other relevant topics. This is especially helpful for smaller businesses who don't have big HR staffs and are looking for qualified individuals to answer those kinds of questions. I saw you go unmuted, Astrid. Did you want to add something?
No, 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 you're doing great.
Okay, perfect.
Just love
I'm
hearing
going
from
to
you guys.
Beautiful. I'm going to be dropping in the chat as I hand things off in a moment. Two really important resources. Number one is going to be a digital flip book that has an at a glance look at our various no cost services. Just kind of give an overview of what is available that we're offering. For example, our monthly no cost job fairs that we have are up to $10,000 reimbursement per new hire that you have, our no cost interns, and much more. The second resource I'm going to be providing is my contact info. I'd be more than happy to provide a business needs assessment to learn a little bit more about what your needs are, both now and in the future, to make sure that 2026 your business needs are supported by the Workforce Development Board. With that being said, I'll hand things off to Astrid. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Micah, for everything that you and your team do for employers in Ventura County and beyond. We're so happy to have your partnership. And now I would love to introduce our trainer today. We have Astrid Servin, one of our HR directors, who you may have had the pleasure of working with directly on that HR hotline. But she'll be leading today's session, so you're in great hands. And Astrid, it's all yours.
Thank you, Micah, and thank you, Anna. I appreciate it this morning. Everyone at Ventura County for joining me for today's webinar. It's a great topic. I'm excited to present it to you. And yes, make sure you jot down this hotline for employers. Tell a friend, tell a business that you know out in Ventura County that this is provided for them for free. It's a great resource, and I love talking to you all on that hotline. If you require a little bit more HR assistance, a little bit more than what the HR hotline provides, you might want to consider membership with California Employers Association. If you go over to employers.org or give us a call, we can provide additional information about what membership looks like. And at the end of the webinar, we'll also provide a little bit of a glance of the different membership plans that we offer. And again, this is for someone who needs additional support that you already get with the phone support. Things like training that you might need, fact sheets, employment forms, templates, handbooks, things like that that you need for your human resources needs. What we are not is a law firm, so this presentation should not be relied upon as legal advice. We want you to consult with your own attorney if something comes up of legal significance. As we know, especially in California, so many things can pop up in the employment cycle. You use us as a resource. We can usually save you a lot of time and money by getting you to the point where you then present it to your legal team, and then you can go from there. So we don't offer legal advice, we just offer education. What we're going to cover today, it's a great topic, like I said before. We're going to cover key steps to building a strong team, and it starts with how to find a great new hire. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what to do even before you onboard someone. We'll dive into then crafting clear and compelling job descriptions, not necessary, not required by law, but definitely a good business practice. And then we're going to talk to you all about sharpening your interviewing skills and telling a friend. All those people who interview in your circle there, in your location, need to be honed in on what to do, what the best practices are for interviewing, and what to stay away from. And then implementing pre-employment best practices to ensure a strong match. Are we making sure that we are a strong match with that candidate? And then finally, we'll explore effective onboarding strategies that set new hires up for long-term success. So lots to cover today in this hour. So we're going to get started. First, you have to determine what type of employee you need. Are you going to need an independent contractor? Are you going to need a temp from like a temp agency or even a temp at your own work location? Or are you hiring a regular employee, which will then be either an exempt employee or an hourly employee? We'll talk about what those means next too. But this is before you even hire. You got to determine what type of worker you need. What does your business need? Is it a long-term employee or a short-term project that you need? And depending on what the work needs are, you're going to then determine the type of employee that you're going to categorize. And it really does matter because the laws are different depending on what you select, what you choose. So we're going to go through first the independent contractor, because as a general rule, anyone who provides labor or services for you is considered an employee. They default to an employee rather than an independent contractor. So the hiring entity, the company who wants to hire that independent contractor, has to show that they actually qualify to be an independent contractor. And we typically follow what's called the ABC test. So the ABC test is A, and it's got to be all of these bullet points. The worker is free from control and direction of the hirer. So different from an employee-employment relationship where we are telling employees what time to come in, what tools to use, we're giving them their job description. This is different. An independent contractor sets their own time frame, their own status, their own things. B, they have to perform work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. This means I own an accounting firm and I hire accountants. I cannot hire an accountant to be an independent contractor because that's what I do. I'm an accounting firm. So all the accountants that work under me must be employees. So the person who I'm hiring to be an independent contractor has to do something different than what I do as an employer. So something like a painter. Okay, a painter can be an independent contractor for an accounting firm. Maybe it's a graphic artist that I just need for a quick project. We are accountants. We don't need this person to come in and do accounting purposes. We need them to do a graphic artist. So that could be your person who performs work outside of what you do. And then they must meet C, is customarily engaged in a trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as the work performed. So I am a graphic artist and I have a company that I work for or that I own that is a graphic artist company. And that's what I do. And I do that for many different companies, not just yours. If I exclusively am working a 40-hour schedule for you only, then I should be your employee. But if I am doing this as a one-off project for you and for the other your neighboring business or another business out there, that's okay because I'm doing it for multiple people. So those are the three things that are required in order to be an independent contractor. Otherwise, they probably need to be classified as an employee. The problem, the problems that can arise where you can get in trouble is that there could be extensive misclassification penalties. Because if I classified you as an independent contractor, and this is even if the worker wants to, hey, I don't want to be an employee, I want to be an independent contractor, well, I can still get in trouble. Okay, so we got to look out for those penalties, and they're extremely high, plus many statutory exceptions to this that we need to review. Those are the ones that might not fall under the ABC test, but you really feel like maybe it's an Uber driver who's still an independent contractor. There are other ones that are exceptions. So if you feel like your worker might fall under an exception to the ABC test, give us a call. We'll talk about what those things are. There's another test called the Borello test. This is what we used to default to. That one is still working for certain jobs that are out there, but by and large, for the most part, all our workers are probably going to be employees when we hire them. Now, we also have to determine whether you want a temp employee, a temporary agency employee, or an actual employee. There's pros and cons to hiring agency employees. The pros are that it's quick and easy. You don't have recruiting costs. You partner with an agency, and we can have these employees come to us right away. There's no impact on your payroll taxes, and you don't have to have workers' comp coverage because your temp agency does. It's a good trial period for you and the temp employee to see if it's a good fit for both of us, right? To see if you like working here, do we like you working for us, and then we'll make you a permanent employee. You can negotiate with that temporary agency a salary, so you can discuss it with them, and they're the middleman. And then no benefits typically, even sick leave is offered by that temp agency, so it's a less cost again for you. The cons are that there's no pride of ownership in that company. You don't get that buy-in from that employee. The employer can have a false sense of security that you have all these employees when truly they can leave you right away, so there's that loyalty that's lacking there. And then there's a liability because you are still a co-employer. Certain things, if the agencies are not in compliance and don't do it right, sometimes you get into this co-employer relationship with that employee, and sometimes you're still at fault for whatever compliance issues the temp agency might have failed to do, especially with wage and hour issues. So you sometimes have to be careful with that as well, and ensure that you're really scoping out the agency that you're using, that you're vetting them, and you're sure that they are following the rules when it comes to California wage and hour law. All right, so let's talk about when you are hiring your employee, you're not going to get an independent contractor, you're not going to get temp employees, you are hiring employees for your workforce. Now you have to determine whether that employee is going to be a salary exempt employee or an hourly employee. In California, workers are going to be defaulted as hourly employees. We are automatically going to assume that your worker is an hourly employee in California, unless you can meet an exemption test. So we're going to talk about that in a couple slides, but an exempt employee has to pass that exemption test, and I'm going to show you what those duties are, and also a salary test. So I'll show you what the salary has to be. Exempt employees are paid a flat salary for the skill they bring to their job. So an exempt employee is saying, I have a skill set that is typically usually like a higher skill set, and I'm paid for that skill set, not for the job I do per hour, but rather for the skill set I bring to the job. And so I'm being paid for that on an annual basis. And so then overtime, meal periods, rest breaks, none of those things apply that like they do for hourly employees. So there's very few compliance issues. It's nice. Employers like having exempt employees, but remember, you've got to do those two things, pass the duties test and the salary. So again, if an employee doesn't meet that exemption, then they have to be hourly employees, meaning we're paid by the hour for the work we perform. That means overtime laws apply for all wage and hour laws apply to our hourly folks. We have to take our meal period by the fifth hour. We got to provide the rest breaks, all that stuff. And there's stringent record keeping requirements. We must keep a time card that is required that shows the time we come in, the time we go to lunch, the time we come back from lunch, and the time we leave work. All that needs to be spelled out on a time card. Here's the minimum wage, which is only going to be in effect for a couple more weeks here, but that is what the hourly minimum wage for the state is, $16.50. Ventura County, believe all the cities in your county still follow the state minimum wage. But if you do have employees working elsewhere, they might be working remotely for you from San Diego or from LA or from the Bay Area, know that there's a lot of other minimum wages that apply as well. But this is the state minimum wage as it is for the next 2 weeks. Exempt employees, like I talked about in the earlier slide, has to meet at least the 68,640 hourly exempt. That is a requirement. So if you're going to have a salaried employee, it has to meet that, at least that. So you're probably asking, well, in 2 weeks, what's it going to be? This is the 2026 minimum wage. It's going to move up to $16.90 an hour for our hourly employees. And then our exempt employees are going to be at that $70,304. So Anna put in our chat there our transition from exempt to non-exempt, because if you're looking at this 70,304 and thinking, that's quite a jump, I wasn't prepared to bump up my exempt folks that high, you may want to consider bringing them down to an hourly. Remember, an exempt employee can always be hourly. An hourly employee can't always be exempt, but we can do it the other way around. So if you're finding that in 2026, you're not going to be able to increase your exempt employees to 70,304, you may want to consider then bringing them to an hourly, which is also always a little bit of a, you kind of have to be careful and delicate about how you do that and not forget those steps. So we do have that fact sheet for you if you'd like to look into that. Know that fast food chains out there have a different hourly rate too, even within your county. Healthcare, they also have a different minimum wage. And typically in those areas and cities and counties where we do have different minimum wages, sick leave usually follows as well, as I'll show you in this slide. There's over 40 local ordinances that have a different minimum wage than the state minimum wage. There's also things like predictive scheduling and flex time that may apply to cities within the Bay Area, especially sometimes in Los Angeles. So just know that the local minimum wage applies to employees who are physically working there. So if their home residence is there and they're working from home, or if they're driving into a city for a period of time, usually it's 2 hours, then that minimum wage applies. We do have a little fact sheet there that you can follow, and we haven't quite posted, I don't believe, the 2026 rates yet because we're still in 2025, but as soon as January 1 hits, we'll have the 2026 ones available for you. So just be aware of that, especially when you have hybrid employees or employees working remote. So earlier I mentioned this exemption, how exempt employees have to meet the duties test and the salary test. So we reviewed what their minimum salary should be. Now let's review what the exemption has to be to the duties test. The most popular ones are listed here. There are a couple of other ones. There's a professional, a computer professional one that meets there. There's a medical doctor one as well. But these are the 3 white collar exemptions. So if you are looking to have, and right now you probably have exempt employees in your workforce, make sure that they're falling under one of these white collar exemptions. That's either the executive, the administrative, or the professional, and that we're really, again, taking the time. We have at CEA, our website at employers.org, you can actually do a search for these 3 exemptions, and they'll give you a little tally sheet of how you're going to keep track, because we do want to make sure that they're working enough time during their workday in these duties to meet that exemption. So anytime they are not working a sufficient amount of time in this workplace, in this work duties, it's going to fall. So primary duties for them have to be 51% of their work for time in that work week must be doing this type of level work. And making sure that our exempt employees are using independent judgment and use of discretion, that they're not having to check in with their manager before making a decision. They're really giving that independent judgment. They're using their discretion to make high-level decisions for the company. And they're doing that 51% of the time. So many companies get in trouble with this, and there's these class action lawsuits that come about because people like Walmart or CVS, Walgreens, all those where managers are managing, they're just not doing it quite 51% of the time. The other time they're doing things like stocking, or they're doing checks stand duties or whatever, cashiering duties. So we want to make sure that we're exploring this in a thoughtful way, that we're actually looking into the job duties our employees are doing and ensuring that they're meeting this exemption. Because anytime this employee wants to file a claim, they can do so. And it's a huge penalties for the employer. We now, fail to provide meal breaks and track their time cards and pay overtime and making sure that they're taking their lunch by the 5th period. We didn't do any of that because they were exempt. And so now the employer has the burden to provide proof that we've done that, and there really isn't any. And so there's lots of penalties that can come about because of that. So we're making sure we're looking at that salary requirement, especially for 2026. Okay, now that we've covered exempt employee classification, hourly employees, how we're going to onboard, how we're going to pick out our employees, let's move on to the next key step in the hiring process, which is advertising, applications, and interviews. We want to find that right candidate, attract top talent. We want to make sure that we have our application process streamlined and that we're conducting effective interviews in a legal way, in a compliant way. So let's check out this next section here. We're going to start with the recruiting process. Now, your recruiting process might be very short and sweet, or it might be very long. We're going to provide you with this example. We just feel like this works really well. This is the way CEA does most of their hiring and their recruiting process. It may or may not work for your company, but let's review these things so that you're aware of how they function, how they work, and that you're in compliance. Know that you don't have to interview everyone who applies. If you have an application system and you get a ton of interviews or you get walk-ins that are sending you an application, you don't have to interview everyone. We want to vet those applications. But if you do talk to an employee, you do talk to them, you do touch this application, you do have to keep that application on file, even if you don't hire them for 4 years. So have a process for storage for that application. The first thing we're going to do is post the ad. Most of you post the ad. Now, there are companies, I just went to do an audit for a company and they don't post anything because they're very popular and most of their hiring is word of mouth and they get a lot of walk-ins. So not everyone posts the ad. I realize that. And we're going to talk about when you do post that ad, what the requirements are and future slides. But there's really no wrong or right way to doing it, but we're just going to kind of talk about this process that we use. So after we post the ad, we've opened the position up. We usually do that internally and externally. So we're giving and providing the opportunity for internal candidates to look at what we're hiring for. And then we start screening the resumes. When you screen resumes, you want to look at things about did applicants actually follow the directions? Like, did you say to do certain things, do certain steps? Did they actually follow the directions of them? And then do they actually have the qualifications that we've asked for? Do they have typos? Things like that. You can start weeding things out based on those answers. Then we look at a job application. We then, after screening those resumes, we then will send out an application to those that we like, those resumes that we like, and we'll ask them to fill out an application. Now, you might skip that step and just go straight to, you're just looking at a straight application, which is fine. You're going to do the same thing with that application. Did they follow directions? Are there typos? Do they look professional in that application that you have? An application is not legally required, but it is a best practice because it's going to give you a lot of information. Sometimes we have a deadline to meet. Did they meet that deadline? Of returning that application. So it's like a funnel process because with each step, we're narrowing down the number of applicants who will end up interviewing in the long run. So now we like who we have here, and we're going to conduct what we call a screen interview, where we call the applicant for a phone interview with the ones that we like the best. And we're going to get a little bit more information after that. And after we do that, after conducting that phone interview, that funnel continues to get more narrow as we select who we want to come on site. So after conducting the on-site interviews, we look at things as, did they present well? Did they come to work on time? We ask additional questions in that on-site interview. And then if we like you, we then check for references. And in your application, you should be asking whether we can call for references. We need that permission in order to check those references. So make sure that in that application, you're asking those questions. We're going to talk about an application in a future slide about what you should and shouldn't include on there too. But we do check for those references. A lot of time employers aren't talking to us anymore about the employee because they're worried or concerned or they shouldn't be talking to us. But you'll be surprised how many employers still do. So I always say try it and see because you never know the information you might receive. So making sure that we're checking those references, even if it's just to verify employment, which is allowed. And then if we like them, we might even do a second job interview. We might ask them to do, and that'll be our kind of a final interview with maybe the person they're going to be working for. Maybe that's the CEO level, that kind of thing. And we'll ask additional questions at that point, making sure we know this candidate by the end. And then finally, we make that job offer. And we'll talk about making that job offer also and what entails in that. So that's a bit of work. That's a lot. Take a breath. We did all that. And you should do all that because we want to vet that application. We want to vet that applicant to make sure that's the right candidate that we want. So another thing to consider then is having a job description for that job. We want to make sure that we've set those expectations on there. The job description is that employment life cycle document. We're describing the job. We're looking at what the responsibilities for the are, what the expectations are, and the essential functions. Now, a job description is different than a job posting. In job description, we're going into the details of that job. We're listing things like physical requirements, what's required, and we're being honest and truthful about that physical requirement. A lot of companies have also gotten in trouble with this when they say that you have to lift and carry 50 pounds, when in reality, you don't. So be careful with that. You want to list whether the job is exempt or non-exempt also, and then position they report to, the workday, the hours, that can be on there. You can always list other duties as assigned, and that is definitely highly recommended because not everything is inclusive in a job description. Things can change. So we want to list that other duties as assigned. Now, our CEA members do have the optional benefit of having CEA University, and there is a job description toolkit that is that you can create a job description on there using that. Also, I mean, honestly, there's all these AI tools that are free that you can use, ChatGPT or other ones, Gemini AI, to create these job descriptions. They actually work really well as well. So I mentioned the job posting is different than the job description because the job posting is just a very small portion you're going to include in whatever job ad you have out there. You're going to list a very small description of the job responsibilities, the work expectations, some physical requirements. Again, be very careful with that one. And then you're going to list the essential functions of that job, whether it's exempt or non-exempt, who it reports to, and a very kind of a workday hours, but also may vary because you want to make sure that you leave yourself some wiggle room should that job hours or overtime, all that kind of stuff change. And then if you are an employer that has 15 or more employees at your work location, there is a salary range that you have to post on there as well. We'll talk about that a little bit more closely there in a future slide as well. Actually, let's do it now. Great transparency. Employers are required to, employers can inquire about salary expectations. So we can't ask about how much do you want to earn, but we can say how much, we can't ask you how much you earned in your previous job, but we can ask you what you expect to make. So no, and we'll talk about that more in detail. The Fair Chance Act is coming in a future slide, but we do have to provide a pay scale to any current employee for their current position upon request. So that's active now. If any employee says, I want to know how much my position pays, they do need to be provided that upon request. And again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, if you have 15 or more employees, you have to include that pay scale for a position in a job posting. Now, I'm being distracted here because I have a little question I just want to get to. Okay, CEA University, Zywave, it's not complimentary membership. It is ending, so that is an optional. You can still get that as an optional. You have to pay for that, but it is something that will be offered to members. And then you will receive a copy of the PowerPoint. And I think Anna is typing that out now. Thank you, Anna. All right, let's move on. So advertising that post, again, just a little bit more detail about your posting there. It's not a one size fits all. So you want to make sure that you know what type of employee are you hiring? What do you need? Advertise internally. You never know what is under your nose. They might be someone that you can develop into a position. So maybe have an in-house referral program, advancement from within. Those work really well with people that you have. They know your company very well. They know the position you're hiring for. So it may be someone they know, or it might be them themselves. So always look internally, because again, you never know. You know those employees really well. So sometimes that works really well to develop them. You can also advertise, of course, externally. I don't know how many people are doing the local newspaper anymore, but there are other areas that you can look to, even the America's Job Centers. You have your workforce development boards. Online, you have your LinkedIn, your ZipRecruiter, Indeed, all those work really well. Even Craigslist is another area that is still being used actually quite often. People are posting on Craigslist, it's free. So just know that there's different avenues, and depending on the kind of employee you're looking for, that's really where you're going to go want to post your ad. So CEA members, you do have a recruiting and hiring toolkit that's available on our website. That is free with your membership. So if you are a member, please look into that recruiting and hiring toolkit. It really helps you stay organized. So employment applications sometimes can be controversial. People love, or don't like them at all. Like I said, I just did an audit for an employer. They did not like employment applications. I talked to them a little bit about the benefits of them, and they are actually now going to be doing that because some of the problems that they're having are things like employees not wanting to work overtime or employees changing their availability. All that can be remedied if you have it on the application as a question. So take a look and see if that's something that makes sense. But you also want to have a compliant application. So review applications carefully once they come in. Does the application mirror the resume? That we're not asking for salary or conviction questions, which we'll go into more detail soon. I already talked about no salary. We can't ask what they earned in their previous position, but you can ask what they expect to make in this position. Applications are often more telling than resumes, so you might get a resume and be okay with that, but the application, again, is going to ask a lot more questions. Reasons why applicant left a position, the ability to perform the job, you're going to ask that question. And then you're going to list references and you're going to ask if you can call them as well. So you need that permission before you check for references. So some job application red flags to look out for. And these are red flags, but doesn't mean that they are necessarily going to stay a red flag. You might get clarity. Once you start asking these questions and looking to get answers, then it might very much explain away why why that issue is there. So lacks information regarding past employer. Maybe they were just quick about writing it in. So ask about that. All this stuff is fair game. During an interview, we can ask about that. Delays and missing information. Things like gaps due to COVID or moving or office plant shutdown, all that kind of stuff may happen. An employee could have been in jail even, and they might tell you that. And that might be, I mean, it's something you shouldn't be using against them depending on what it is, but it's information that you're going to receive. Applicant cannot recall the name of a former supervisor. That's kind of a red flag there. Excessive crossouts and changes. Are they being very unprofessional? Reason for leaving past job is left blank. Let's ask them about that. And then again, those gaps in employment history could be very much explained, but let's ask about it because typically people will actually write in the reason why there's a gap in employment history. So look out for those things and then train whoever's interviewing in your workplace to ask about these things. It's okay to ask. Okay, interviews today look very different than they've used to in the past. 89% of recruiters of hiring companies are now conducting video and virtual interviews. 89%, so that's huge. So candidates have to get used to video. And our younger folks are used to video conferences and all that, but not our older generation. So be mindful of that and don't use that against them. We want to use our platforms that we have and make sure that we're testing them, that we're doing our planning ahead of time so that we're aware that we're going to be conducting an interview, and that we're also allowing some grace for employees who may not be as comfortable doing face-to-face interviews using a platform like this. So some sort of grace with those employees. We want to increase in panel interviews with just more personal. We get to know that candidate fully rounded a little bit better. Wear professional attire. So we want to make sure that they have a good impression of us and that we're getting a good impression of them. And making sure that we're checking in with them and that they know it's going to be a cameras on type interview, that we're telling them to test their video capabilities or the platform that we've told them to use. All these things that might seem like common sense, but really end up taking up a lot of time and really maybe derailing the interview because the person is now very nervous and they're not prepared like they were in advance. So making sure that we're doing that and sending them to them in advance. And really build that rapport. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to do that through video. So, stop and do those things ahead of time so that, and put it in like as a script before you start the interview. Okay. All right, let's move on to conducting the actual interview, whether it be in video or in person. You want to be prepared. We have our application in front of us. We want to show that applicant the respect that we actually took the time to review their resume or review their application and that we value their time, they value our time. So we want to be prepared and ask thoughtful questions when they're in front of us. Ask for explanation about those gaps, those red flags that you saw, the reasons for leaving. Don't shy away from those questions. We need to know. It's okay. That's a compliant question. Test your applicant's knowledge. Ask them those. If that's if you're hiring an HR person, ask them those difficult HR questions. See how they answer them. And then take notes. We don't want you taking notes on the actual application because that application is going to be kept for 4 years. We want them on a separate paper not on their resume and all that. Keep those applications and resumes clean. They're going to be part of the personnel file that may be discoverable in the future. And if you're writing down notes on that, it may be misconstrued or misinterpreted in the future. So take notes on a separate sheet of paper. Answer applicants' questions, be prepared for those questions. And then in closing, what's the next steps and the timelines that they should be looking for. Interview pitfalls. We want to make sure everyone who interviews at your location is aware of these pitfalls that we're checking and not asking about protected classifications. And sure, there's a lot of protected classifications in California, as you may know. So make sure that we're not asking questions related to that. Nothing about economic background or family planning, criminal history, which we'll go into more detail, and salary history, which we've reviewed already. Interview awareness, consider the following. Did the candidate arrive early? Did they make a good impression? Maybe bring copies of resumes, which is also kind of going away. So it depends on the type of employee you're hiring. Were their answers short or were they rambling? Were they a professional interviewer? We have those, so be aware of those as well. Sometimes they might be arrogant and it's a facade. If you look good on paper or you're just answering with phrases that maybe they Googled, then that's a kind of a red flag, right? You're not going to win with my vote for that one. When you ask questions, did they kind of give a thoughtful pause before they answered? And then how did they describe their former employers? That's a big one. I love asking about that because you'd be surprised how many employees will badmouth their former employee. Now, there's a constructive, nice way, respectful way of saying maybe that wasn't a right fit for you, but you'd be surprised how much employees really badmouth their former employer in a way where it's inappropriate and disrespectful, and probably better to stay away from that. Were they enthusiastic about the position? Now, I'd also be cautious about that because they might be very nervous as well. We have at our CEA website sample interviews for managers or exempt employees and customer service. So just know that those are out there. But we want to ask very open-ended questions. We want them to really share. They should be doing most of the talking, not us. So what interests you about the job? Why are you thinking about leaving? These, I'm not going to read them all to you, but these are the kinds of questions we should be asking during an interview so that we really try to get them to talk. That's what we want. We want them doing the talking. 80% of the time, they should be doing the talking, or even more than that, so that we really try and get to know them as much as possible. In your position, depending, and we have a lot of employers out here from different industries, you may benefit from a behavioral interview, which is a more personal style of interviewing. It's more of a conversation. You're forcing them to give you examples of things. So it can be a more accurate reflection of what the future performance might be like. You're focusing on certain experiences that they've had, what type of behavior they have, their knowledge, their ability to do a certain type of job. So you may want to consider this style of a behavioral interview. SAR is what they use. SAR stands for situation, action, and result. And it's really a structural approach used in behavioral interviews. It helps them, you ask them for a situation, and then they have to give you what the situation was, the sample of what it was, what action did they take, and you're really going to hone in on that action. What did they do during that problem that they had, that situation that occurred? And we're going to maybe ask questions during that action phase of the interview. And then we're going to see what result came out of that situation. So typically they state a problem, what did they do to resolve it, and then the result. They maybe reached a compromise, maybe they solved the problem, and then we're able to, again, ask questions about that and really hone in on how they behave during that process. So sometimes it's a really good way of interviewing. We have examples of that, of SAR interviews, and it really works well, especially for those high-level, more professional jobs. So be prepared for these types of questions that the employee might ask you, because remember, they should be interviewing you as well. So they might ask you, what skills and experiences would help someone be successful in this position? Be prepared to answer that. You should be able to have something for them. What questions or concerns do you have about my ability to do this job? That's a great question. What is one thing about your culture you're most proud of? So they kind of get to know the work environment. And then what is your timeline and preferred way to follow up? You should already be doing that, but if you're asked that, make sure that you have answers for that. What are the next steps here? So now you've done all this research, all this interviewing, you decided you like a candidate. We're going to go with this person. You really want them. You don't want them to leave you. So we want to make sure we make that job offer soon. Be prepared for negotiations, especially in a tight labor market. That's probably going to happen. So know the market you're hiring for your industry, also for your location. If you're not sure if you're being competitive enough, you could go to certain companies that do comp surveys. CEA partners with the comp survey one. So whether you're a member or not, you could still access it at employers.org. We do offer that compensation service. Be prepared to explain the entire offer, including benefits. Don't disregard your benefits. That's such a great tool to use when you're negotiating, when you're making that job offer. Highlight those things. If you offer things like extra holidays or a strong vacation plan, make sure that we're mentioning it in that offer. If you offer Flex Fridays, if you have daycare, for example, again, you want to highlight those things. Alternative work schedules, you're mentioning them. And then be prepared for an applicant to negotiate the offer and know beforehand if you're willing to negotiate, or maybe you're not the decision maker. So know that you have to maybe give them time to, or give yourself time to ask someone higher up if you can negotiate or not. Know those before going into it. Always a good idea and best practice to have an offer letter, not required, but always a good practice. But if you are going to do it, we want to make sure that it's a compliant offer letter. I can't tell you how many letters I see out there that are not compliant and can get you into some legal trouble. So make sure that it is, and you can just kind of follow these steps that you're seeing here. CEA also offers a template of an offer letter. It's already written for you. You can customize that much easier, but just follow these steps that you're seeing here. The most important ones that I want to highlight is that at will employment reminder, because we want to make sure that this offer letter is not being misinterpreted as a contract of employment, because California employers, we are at will employers, especially as private employers, we are at will. So we don't want this offer letter not to have that. We have to have that at will disclaimer so that it doesn't get used against us in the future. We're going to list all those wonderful benefits on there. And then there's contingency statements if they are applied to your workforce. So if you are a work environment that background checks or does reference checks or does drug testing, we want to make sure we put that on that offer letter as well as a contingency statement. I mentioned reference checks, and others still do them. Again, at a minimum, do those reference checks and check for employment, making sure that those dates match. If you do use a third-party background check, there are a lot of laws that are in effect right now. So we want to make sure that those third-party background check companies we're using know about our California laws, which I'm going to go through. Driver's license check and motor vehicle report only if they're required by the job. We cannot be asking for driver's license, especially we know some of those laws changed last year. We can't, or maybe it was the year before. We can't be asking for driver's license unless it pertains to the job itself. Maybe they're a driver, then it would pertain. And then consider the position to do things like those background checks. If we aren't having a high level or security type job where people are going into other people's homes, they're handling cash, that kind of thing, maybe consider not doing those criminal background checks anymore. So remember, we have to take that question away from the application. We can't ask about it during the interviews as well. Nothing about criminal background checks anymore. We cannot consider things on arrest that are not resulting in a conviction. Any of these things here we can't consider because what we have is a Fair Chance Act that is in effect. Then that Fair Chance Act says that we can't inquire about criminal history if we're an employer with 5 or more employees until after a conditional job offer. So if you are using a third-party agency and all that, we're not doing that until we've made a conditional job offer. So then we can ask about those criminal background questions after conditional background check has been extended. I'm sorry, job offer has been extended, because now they're making it more difficult to us to rescind that offer, because we can only deny if, let's say something comes up in that criminal history, we can only deny that if there's a direct and adverse relationship to the duties that they're doing. So again, if something pops up in the background check, we cannot deny that job unless we're able to show that that conviction history has a direct and adverse relationship with the specific duties of that job. So if I suddenly know that you have been convicted of a certain crime, but it really doesn't have to do with the job I'm hiring you for, I still need to hire you. I need to continue that hiring process and I cannot rescind that offer. Now, if I'm hiring you to be a driver and your DUI is super fresh and just happened, now I can consider that because there's a direct and adverse relationship to that job. So there's actually even expanded protections for not just applicants that are first hiring, but even those employees who you might have who now have a criminal history. You might have heard through the grapevine that they do, and they're applying for an internal position. They are protected by this law as well. Even people who have a desire to be considered for a different position, we cannot use that against them. So making sure that we're evaluating, that we're informing our higher leadership staff of this law. If you are going to deny employment, so you found that, yeah, there is a direct and adverse relationship here, I can't hire you. You have a DUI and this is a driver position, so I can't hire you. You now need to provide written notification of that preliminary decision and include specific conviction of what you used to make that you're rescinding that offer for this reason. You got to give a copy of the conviction history and then an explanation of the applicant's right to respond within 5 days. So you still have to wait 5 days to rescind that offer because you're giving them an opportunity to explain themselves. Is there a reason I should be considering you for employment, even though you have this? If you still deny employment, 5 days goes by, they didn't provide anything, or maybe what they provided wasn't sufficient, then you need to provide a final letter. It's called an adverse action notice. And that notice tells the applicant that they can actually still go file something with the Civil Rights Department. So it is a huge deal here. That's why employers are kind of going away from it and going, you know what, I'm not even going to do them anymore unless it's a high risk or security type job. This is just the consideration of individualized assessments that we need to do. These are the kinds of things you're going to be asking employees if you are doing a criminal background check and assessing the situation. If you're an employer that does post-offer pre-employment drug tests or physical exams, just be aware that we're doing it for the right reasons. Companies have to pay for those exams as well if we're asking them to do it. Drug and alcohol, all this is post-offer, right? We're doing it contingent upon them passing these, but we've made the job offer. Psychological tests are rarely done, but if you are doing them, we're not asking about religious beliefs or sexual orientation in those questions. Cannabis use. So we do, maybe you're an employer that does drug testing. Remember, we have to eliminate cannabis from that panel because cannabis is a protected right now. And unless you have the right kind of drug test that detects whether the employee is currently active or was active, if we don't have the right test, we shouldn't be testing for cannabis. But rarely do we find drug tests that are actually testing the right way for cannabis, and we will be out of compliance if we're not testing the right way. All right. So best practice reminder here to just inform the applicant that we maybe went a different direction. The thanks but no thanks letter. We want you to send an email or call them, thanking the applicant for their time. There may be something that in the future they apply to, so you want to keep a good relationship with that person. It leaves your company looking very professional as well. You want to let them know that another candidate has been chosen, and we're not going to, if it's a call, usually it's better to do an email or a letter, but if it's a call, we're not spending a lot of time talking about why the other candidate was chosen. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them any kind of information regarding that. We're going to wish them luck, and we're going to tell them if there's a better fit in the future, they're welcome to apply. We're not going to promise them anything in the future either. Okay, so we want to make sure that they're aware that they can move on to the next employer if they need to. All right, let's talk about hiring compliance and best practices, kind of setting off on the right foot. Now that I've made that job offer, maybe they have now accepted that, and we want to make a good impression so that we keep this employee for a very long time. That's the hope, right? Because turnover and attrition is very expensive. So we want to follow consistent onboarding procedures. We want to make sure we have a good onboarding process, a good orientation process, Companies are now spending a little bit more time on this because they realize how serious and important this is in a good employment experience for the employee. We want to make sure we have the required hiring forms and notices, and I'll show you what is required in all those forms. We want to review policies and sign acknowledgement forms because that is our proof that the employee received this information. Without it, it's their word against ours. So we want to make sure that we're collecting those acknowledgement forms back from them. That we have direct deposit authorization. And there's two, by the way. There's the direct deposit authorization that you're going to get for just your normal employment cycle. And then there is a second direct deposit authorization form for any kind of final pay. Final pay, as you know, in California has to be done as a actual live check, unless you have a direct deposit form that is separate from the regular one that actually authorizes you to direct deposit the final check. Still has to be done on the final day, but there is a direct deposit form. If you're a member, we have that form available to you. We want to make sure that we're considering things like trainings and what they need to do, what are the timelines for it. And if we are doing training and onboarding and orientations, we are paying them for that because that is all compensable time in California. We have our wage and hour laws that says you have to pay at least minimum wage for the time that they spend doing filling out forms, orientations, any of that training has to be paid. Now, you can pay a lower rate. It has to be at least minimum wage for training time, but you also have to have it in your policy. So if you have an employee making $50 an hour, but your onboarding and your training, you want to pay minimum wage, you can do that. Even travel time, if they're maybe going to a conference in Vegas or something, and you want to pay them minimum wage for that travel time or for that training time, you can do that. But it needs to be put in writing so that the employee knows ahead of time that they're not going to be making their higher rate for this. They're going to making minimum wage, or you can even set a different rate. You can set it at $25 an hour, whatever you want it to be. But again, ahead of time and be consistent so that we're not showing favoritism over certain positions over others. Okay, so new hire orientations, I talked about this, they really set the tone. They can be done virtually or in person, but really they do set the tone. Already have some sort of review process in place so that we're frequently checking in with this employee. A typical one would be a 30-day check-in, a 60-day, and a 90-day. Some of you just do 90 days, that's okay, but really we want to touch them as much as possible during that first few months because that is a telltale sign of whether this employee is going to work out or not. So really, really check in with them. Have things like job shadowing, buddy system. It can really increase engagement, and then stay compliant by training your management on all this stuff. So I won't review all these requirements for hiring forms because there's actually 2 pages, but you have the slide deck. So check and make sure that you have this. We also have a new hire orientation sheet that has links to all these forms on our website. If you follow us at employers.org, you can take a look at this. And it really is, you want to make sure you have all this. When we do audits, this is exactly what we're checking for. All right. So again, pages worth of that. And again, we have a new hire and orientation checklist on our website at employers.org that has links to all these forms. Your employer responsibility is also to have an I-9 on file for every employee that verifies both their identity and the legal authorization. Don't just have the employee fill out Section 1. Remember that you have to fill out Section 2. So when we do audits, we check for this as well. So check and make sure that you have this for every employee. And don't discriminate against individuals on the basis of national origin or citizenship. We're not asking them or telling them what kind of identification to bring to the meeting. We're allowing them to get the form and they can bring whatever form of IDs they feel is pertinent to them. We don't require this for independent contractors or employees. Before we end, I just want to go through California's training requirements because there are quite a few now. Remember, we have to do our workplace violence prevention plan that requires both training and a written plan. And I have a little slide for on that next. We also want to make sure we do our harassment prevention training for employees and supervisors. If you have minors that are working for you, anybody under 18, you also have to have mandated reporter. That is a requirement. And then all employers have to do heat illness and outdoor illness prevention plans. That also requires a written plan and training as well. So don't forget about those. The Workplace Violence Prevention Plan, this overview, remember, is a written plan. There are very limited exceptions to employers who do not have to have one. So most of you have to do your retraining. So this is a law that was passed July of 2024, but it has a requirement to train every year. And you got to touch that written plan because you got to adjust that accordingly every year. Our harassment training requirements is for you to provide 2 hours of training for your supervisors, 1 hour for your non-supervisors every 2 years. And you have to do this within 6 months of hire, or if you're promoting a manager, within 6 months of promoting them. That training can't just be a video. We used to just pop in a video and leave it alone. It has to be interactive. We actually have some coming up. So we have one coming up this Thursday if you need to sign up for it. So make sure that that training is interactive so that the employee has an ability to ask questions. So to wrap all this up, I hope this was an informative session for you all. We want to make sure that you remember to develop those job descriptions for all your positions within the company and really keep that as that employment lifecycle document. Determine needs and ensure proper classification. Are you going to need an hourly employee, an exempt employee, an independent contractor, an employee? What do you need for your workforce? Know what those the compliance that implies with each one of those as well, classifications. Have a standardized way of hiring your employees and then make sure they're compliant. You know all the forms that you need. There's 2 pages worth, so make sure that we're touching those and creating a good onboarding experience, that we're starting out on the right foot, and ensure that your training is up to date for all your new hires. Really set that positive tone for your new hires, and that way we're setting everyone up for success. All right, I'm going to check in and just make sure I don't have any questions. You've got links there for the training that's coming up on Thursday. Thank you, Anna. Just a reminder of your HR hotline, which is super informative. I know I've talked to some of you online. So again, tell a business friend that you have this available to them at the county. And sometimes you just need another ear to listen to. So I'm going to stop talking and throw it back to you, Anna. Thanks for everybody for your attention.
Okay, I was trying to keep up with you fast and furious in the chat there. So if you have not been following along, definitely open up that chat box because I have been trying to provide you with as many resources to go along with Astrid's training to just supplement and make sure that you have all the information that you need. So open up those links for me. So if you do find that you need a little extra, the slide that's on your screen right now is information about CEA membership. We strongly encourage you to consider that, even at just the associate level, to just get that additional support. In the chat, I also put the link to the next training that is, again, sponsored by our partners over at Ventura County. That's happening on January 13th, the 2026 labor law update. So that's going to give you some guidance on what's changing, what's new for 2026, so that you can stay compliant accordingly. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we do have that. I promised you a link. So in the meantime,
and I actually am doing that labor law update on January 13th. So you'll be
go. So we'll be back.
I was just checking my schedule. I'm like, oh, that's me.
I'm putting the link in the chat as well, but this is the that survey that I mentioned at the beginning of today's training. That is, again, 5 very brief questions. Most of them are multiple choice. So if you can click the link in the chat or you can scan that QR code, that will allow us to continue to serve you in the best way possible. So that just allows us and our partners over at Ventura County. And if you are here for continuing education credits, your HRCI code today, 724473, SHRM code 25-ZEUS, that is an S, apologies, ZEUS6, Zeus 6, how funny. If you need any guidance on what to do to redeem those continuing education credits for certification with each of those organizations, you can always call into that HR hotline or email us ceainfo@employers.org. We're more than happy to guide you there. And with that, I think that's it. We went fast and furious and we only got you 1 minute over. So again, I want to thank our partners over at Ventura County for sponsoring, for providing you with that complimentary HR hotline. And as always, Astrid, thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. And thank you all for joining us live. We look forward to seeing you on January 13th for that 2026 labor law update, and have a great week. We'll see you soon. Cheers, everyone.